the whole idea is, do we need to develop an approach for storing and accessing all the information pertaining to business analysis activities? So that's the main purpose of this activity. So
Okay.
what does it involve? Yeah, Chipko.
Okay. Go ahead. Yeah.
So what does it involve? It involves how you can organize the information in terms of what kind of formats, what channels, what specific artifacts would you like to create, how often does it, at what level of detail should the information be captured, the granularity as what we call, should be very high level, should be technical, should be business, should be business, techno commercial, everything related to that, and any relationships between the information. If you've got any kind of relationships that you could establish between the front end information that you capture from the users, and then how that can be converted into the data that can be stored into the database. So all of these kind of relationships, how to establish this relationship, is there a kind of validation, some verification involved? So all of those we try and establish during this planning phase. How to use information across multiple initiatives, and if you've got different projects running, different programs, different portfolios of work involved at the same time, how can you actually stitch across all this information that is coming through from these different channels, different programs, and actually have a kind of a sensible data and sensible content strategy. That's what is important, so you can make some meaningful analytics and insights coming out of this data and content. How to store and access information again. So what kind of tools are you using? Are you using any databases? What kind of database is it? Is it SQL, NoSQL? Is it some kind of flat file information that you're storing? Or do you have images? Do you have video content, media files? How are you going to store? Do you have to have a separate media storage network? So all of those plans are what you discuss here. And the characteristics about the information that must be maintained. What kind of data would you like to maintain? Is it data that you are generating, or is it data that actually is created by the users, what we call as user generated content? All the social media types, for example, you take a photo on your cell phone, that's your user generated content. You take a video, that becomes yours. You tag somebody, then you write some posts, comments, blogs. All of these are UGC, as what we call user generated content, as opposed to what is peer reviewed, what is done within the organization in a formal way. So some kind of reviewed content, to YouTube videos and things that actually get pushed down through to the users and the customers from the organization. So top down, and then this is bottom up. So all these kind of information mechanisms and channels and modes and formats, all of these are discussed and decided at this stage. So we need to organize information in a structure that allows, number one, easy location of information. We need to actually identify where that is stored so that we can retrieve it later. It does not conflict with other information, so it needs to be integral. We need to maintain the integrity of that information, right? So we should not duplicate too many things, not the same information stored in 10 different locations. So if there's any change that needs to be done in one particular piece of stuff, that would actually affect the other. So in fact, we use a concept called as OPOPOT. OPOPOT is one person, one place, one time. So that is a rule that we typically follow. So at any point of time, too many people spoil the broth, as they say, right? So we should try and keep it simple and make sure that the information that we're capturing is uniform, unique, and it is integral. So we apply locks to that so that no two people are trying to edit the information at the same time. That will create conflicts, conversion problems, and things like that. So we follow the OPOPOT rule: one person, one place, one time. And it does not create duplicate copies. That's the whole idea. We should not have too many duplicate information, and that's the whole idea of having this OPOPOT rule. Type and amount of information collected, very important. Again, you need to consider about how you're going to capture the information. What is the amount of information? If it's running into terabytes, and if it is running into gigabytes, so there is a better way of handling that information. So for example, if you want to capture videos, typically videos and images occupy much bigger space than, let's say, just text content. So if the information is just text, that's fine, you can store it in, in a flat file or in some small little database. But if it is even images or videos, in fact, the technical architecture should not tell that it should be stored in a database. It should be architected in such a way that it is images and the video files, the media files are stored elsewhere in a media storage, or what we call as CDNs, content delivery network. So the database is not really, stuffed with too many of these blobs, big large objects, binary large objects, blobs. So we should keep it clean and safe. And in the database, if you want, you can just refer to that the media file that you have. So you give the URL here, but don't store the images, videos, and audio files within the database. And the size and the complexity of the information, again, that's what we were discussing. For different types of information, different complexities involved, depending on whether it is easy to access, or is it secure information, is it kind of information that has to be accessed only by some people. Then you put it into some kind of physical location, or in a place where it is secured physically, so only people with the right access can get through, and then people with the right roles and right credentials could log in, and whoever has got the authorization to access that information could access that. So all of these need to be considered when you start planning your information management. And in terms of the abstraction, so as I was talking about the level of detail, that's also called granularity. So how detailed can you go? How technical can you go? How high level can you go? So it all depends on the, number one, it really depends on the audience, the type of audience. If the audience are like business people or salespersons, customers, marketing and users, and these kind of people, obviously you don't want to actually delve too much into detail and give too much of jargon and give too much of technical lingo there. You would try and avoid that, to just keep it simple, functionality, and then plain speak. But then when you talk about the audience being, like, for example, if it's developers, if it is testers, and if it's a team and the SMEs who are aware of the platform, underlying platform tools and techniques and the technologies, then you can try and use some of the detailed, perhaps that's the audience that at that point of time, and that audience need a lot of detailed and more granular, finer details of how you can accomplish something. So you should really go into depth for that kind of an audience. So when we talk about, yesterday we mentioned the traceability, right? So how the requirements would actually move from forward, from all the way from requirements, architecture, high level design, low level design, development, testing, so which is the forward. And then you also talked about the backward. So how the code, if there's any change that needs to be done in the code, how can that be traced back, all the way back to the requirements through the design, architecture, and finally up into the source of requirements. So that's the backward traceability. So in terms of the traceability, how can, again, this be structured is based on how you would define the complexity of the domain. So if it is, for example, if you go to a doctor, the doctor might actually say that, yeah, this is, you're feeling this pain, this is because of this. But in fact, in the medical lingo and the jargon, it has got some very difficult, impossible to pronounce names, and some glucolyphoto lymphoma or something they say, and then they would actually break it down into, oh, that means this, right? So the medical domain, the healthcare domain, financial services domain, a lot of these different domains have got their own complexity in terms of how they would define some of the words and the phrases. So you need to really understand to what extent you would need to get in details. If it is the people who operate at that level, then you can speak there. But then obviously not everybody within your consumption of your content would be familiar with that. So you need to consider that. Any requirement related tasks or risks involved. So what are the kind of risks involved in the requirements? Is it technical risk? Is it some kind of technology risk, tool, or lack of availability of tools? What are the organization standards? What are the kind of branding guidelines, the communication aspects that we have? All of those, and we discussed this yesterday about the regulatory requirement like HL7, HIPAA for healthcare, and then food and drug administration, again, for some of the pharma industry, FDA, and then FCA Financial Conduct Authority in the UK for banks. All of these different regulatory bodies, imposing their own requirements, and how that should be, the business rules, the policies, the procedures, and how often they need the reports back to them. All of these are important to be considered, and understanding the cost and benefits involved with the tracing. So every activity obviously involves cost, and there's a side effect to some of the things, and perhaps there is a direct benefit attached to why you do those things. So all of these would actually help in structuring your the information management processes. So what kind of techniques we would use in this activity? There again, we don't use just one. We have got quite a lot of, or a mix of different techniques depending on the context, depending on scenarios. We use brainstorming, we use interviews again, because we would like to understand what's happening. We use the item tracking or the backlog item prioritization and traceability. We use the lessons learned from the sessions that we have, like the sprint retrospectives. We do the mind mapping. That's another thing that we do here, very important, because that would actually give you the kind of semantic relationships. It doesn't really give you too much of inroads into why something is happening, or the logic, the rationale, or the solutions, but it actually gives you the semantic relationships between different entities, different ideas, and how you can link them up in some way. So this is basically a visual tool to help you, just to get a bit of better idea. But it's not really that effective to actually give you the solutions or to give you the ideas about how you can solve some problem. But it will definitely give you some a newer way of looking at things. So mind mapping, I suggest, definitely is a good tool, but you need to use it with caution. Process modeling, we were discussing the other day as well. So it's all about how you'd use UML and the BPMN, the business process modeling notation, to create activity models, to create the state charts, and to create some of the process workflows involving the breakdown scenarios, the workarounds, actors, and who are the approvers, who are the reviewers, and where could be potentially the breakdown scenarios. So identification of those, the down times, the waste, all of these, the waiting times, all of this is very important to hear. Again, surveys are questions you can use, but just take it with a pinch of salt. And workshops, again, are a good tool, good kind of technique that you can potentially use in this context to get to identify the different sources of information, what can be happening, how can you deal with that. If you want to take a decision, should we use a third party cloud service, or should we use our own hosting, local hosting at our premises? How can we do that? So if you want to take some decisions, if you're not sure, then you can consider getting the people into a room and organizing some workshops to take quick and effective decisions. And that's why I think workshops, interviews, and brainstorming, they're really helpful in that way. So these are the kind of techniques that you can potentially use to try and have some better idea about how you can structure your information around, and how you can manage it better. So again, this is basically about planning at this stage. You're not really doing that at this stage. In terms of stakeholders involved, there are different stakeholders involved in this activity as well. We talk about, for example, the domain subject matter experts, very, very important, because they know, for example, if it's something to do with security, you get an idea in terms of what kind of security and roles and responsibilities, and physical security, data transition security, all technologies, the firewalls that potentially can be used. So you get to understand that side of things. So it's always better to actually check with a domain subject matter expert, or a person who is an expert in that area, to get a proper knowledge about how you can, what kind of information is potentially available, how can you maintain it, what are the sources, do you get help or support from the team, how are they available, is the support available 24/7, all these kind of things. Then some books available, are there some things that are available readily for you to refer if you're in doubt? So all of these can be checked with the SMEs to get a better handle on how you can manage the information around it. some of the regulators, for example.
It is.
No, this domain is domain knowledge, basically. So this is the healthcare domain, or it could be retail, manufacturing, the different domains, banking, financial services, insurance, retail, shopping kind of thing. So that's the domain that this is talking about. So
You're talking about that. I was understanding completely different. Okay.
yeah, so no, if it is security, I mean, the reason why I told security as an example is the security, cyber security experts, for example, is one area. It's an SME. So in fact, IABA has got a certification for cyber security. The exam costs around $550 or something, very expensive. I'm not sure why they put it such a high expense, but they do offer a certification called cybersecurity analysis professional or something like that, CC. Um, um, so the domain here is basically the people who are the person who is familiar with the laws, the procedures, the policies, and the workarounds involved within that specific industry or the domain. So that's why this domain is that the subject matter expert is basically the expert in that domain. And regulator is basically as we discussed, these are the industry standard regulators and people and the bodies who would monitor and come up with some kind of laws and rules around that, and give a sense of governance around in that particular domain. So if it is
Yeah, so regulators, I'm fully aware of that. That's
yeah,
not a problem. I was more focused on the what do you mean by domain subject matter, because that's what I was in. Okay, basically it is different industry.
that's right, yeah, industry domains, that's also called domain in that kind of things, and in the parlance of BA and other things. Technology also, we say technology, different domains are there. So even in IT, we say, for example, manufacturing, retail, banking, these are all different domains. So different industries. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah. Then sponsor. So you need to actually be more in touch with the sponsors, the project sponsors, the business sponsors, understand what their needs are, what they would like to, kind of get reported on or updates on. So again, this is something that you need to work in close proximity with the sponsors to understand their information management needs. So again, going back to the MIS days, right? Management Information System, MIS reports that we used to give every month and every quarter and maybe every fortnight, depending on what the management needs. So we need to give that intelligence or the information to them, and we used to create the reports, right? And even MIS reports for whether it's sales process, or whether it is production or manufacturing, whatever it is. So we used to have this MIS reports being sent out to the senior management, saying that this is the amount of sales that we have done, this is the forecast, this is what we could close on this quarter, blah blah blah, all of those things, right? Every period and end of the quarter or end of a month or end of a fortnight, we used to send that. So again, that is something to do with the sponsors requirement of or a need of the information that they would need so that they can take decisions effectively. So again, you work with all these different stakeholders in this activity. So it's very, very important to understand this. So again, it's basically what you're doing in this activity is to plan for what kind of information needs arise for these different stakeholders and how you can sometimes they provide inputs, sometimes they take output. So for example, regulators, they need both input and output. They have these policies, laws, and procedures and rules and business rules. They publish some of these reports, and they change the laws every now and then. So you need to be aware of that. And then once they change it, which is basically what you're getting as input to your work, and then you need to adjust your products, services, and offerings, and then the functionality, whatever it is, accordingly. And then they would expect you to give them some kind of reports in return, maybe once a year or whatever you file with those bodies. Or if you have got an invention or a patent, you would need to let them know and then say that these are the things that are covered, blah, blah, blah. So the same with the sponsors as well. So they expect you to take the inputs from them, which is the budgets, their expectation, the vision, the roadmap, what they would like to get out of this program or a product. That's the input for you, and then as an output, they would expect you to tell them what's happening in the project pretty much on a regular basis, keep them updated in terms of what's happening so that they can take some decisions. So and then subject matter expert is again they would, more than output, they don't expect any output from us, but they would potentially come and have a look at the work product that we have got, the artifacts that we created. They would review, they would actually kind of look at the requirements. They say, okay, you can go this way, you can consider these options, blah blah. So they act as consultants in that sense. So this is the kind of piece of work that you do with the within this activity here in the business analysis information management.